dialing in on time. Well, let's wait for another 5 to 10 minutes for the rest to join in. We are expecting quite a number of more to come in. Yeah, so just bear with us for a few minutes.
No problem.
Okay, it's 35 minutes past 10. Time to start. Firstly, good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us for this session. Together with the Bursa Malaysia, Kenanga is very delighted to be able to co-organize this morning's briefing by GHL, our leading e-payment service operator. And I'm very pleased to welcome our two speakers, Mr. Sean Hesh, GHL CEO, and also Mr. Dennis So, the head of investor relations. Okay, in terms of the agenda for this morning, Mr. Sean and Dennis will take about maybe 45 minutes to an hour to talk to us about what the future holds for GHL and how they navigate the complexities of the industry. After which you're welcome to pose questions. I encourage you to do that. And for that, you can either signal to us to unmute you. You can do that by clicking on the hand icon on your screen. Or if you prefer, you can actually post your questions on the chat box. We look forward to that. So without further ado, please, Dennis and Sean, over to you. You can start the session now.
Thank you, Russell. Dennis?
Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. Together with me this morning is Sean. Sean is the Group CEO of GHL Systems. He has joined us for 7 months now. He's our new Group CEO. And I will hopefully not take 45 minutes to 1 hour and bore you. And I will try to take you guys through our cashless space as well as our operations of GHL. Okay, so I will very quickly run through our slides and leave as much time to Q&A as I can. Okay, so thanks to Bursa and Kenanga for inviting us to do this presentation, and I hope you find this interesting. Okay, the obligatory disclaimer. I will make available the slides after the presentations. Okay, let me start off by sharing with you what the Malaysian government, as with a lot of other governments in Southeast Asia, are already accelerating as far as digitization processes are concerned. So a few months back, the Malaysian government actually released their blueprint to go digital, and their vision had 3 objectives, 6 trusts, 22 strategies, 48 national and sectoral initiatives, and so on and so forth. Don't worry, I won't go through the entire 104 pages, but I do want to pull out a few key focus of the government as far as digitizing and cashless is concerned. Now, as I mentioned just now, there's a whole bunch of stuff as far as the trust and the objectives and so on and so forth is concerned. But let me start with this one. Okay, Trust 1, Strategy 5, Initiative 9. As you can see, the government has actually stated that they want to go cashless. The government, meaning the federal and the state governments, state level agencies. And the idea here is to actually encourage people to go cashless. Okay, and the target is to go by 2020. And this was further underpinned by what our Ministry of Finance has actually come out to say earlier this month, where he said all payments to government services will be made cashless by 2022. So this is actually a very, very good step by the government taking the lead in encouraging and making cashless payments a norm. Okay, so and this bodes well for people like us, because once people become a lot more comfortable using cashless, they will do so across the board, not just to the government, but also to their consumption. Okay, the next thrust that I want to focus on is actually to make it easier for companies like ourselves to improve on the onboarding system. Okay, now as you can see, the idea here is for the government to increase electronic payments amongst the retail segment, especially small merchants, and to actually improve consumption by the government, by the consumers. The key thing here to note is that these are the targets they want to achieve: 400 electronic payments by 2020 and 36 payment touch points for 1,000 people. Now we are still away from hitting all these targets, because today we are only about 150 payment transactions per capita, and we are only about 24. So we have easily another 50% growth to our terminal touch points to be able to hit what the government wants to hit. So what the government, I think, understands is, in order for people to be able to go cashless, you really need to enable the payment touch points. In other words, if you go to a char kway teow stall and stuff like that, and they're still accepting cash, that doesn't help. So it's up to people like ourselves and the banks to actually improve on the touch points. So the what the government wants to achieve and what the addressable market is still very interesting for us. Okay. The third one I want to talk about is what the government is doing regionally, okay, as far as the ASEAN countries are concerned. So all this while, if you've been following, the central banks have already started having conversations about doing cross-border trades and payments and stuff like that, as far back as 2017, 2018. Okay, so the 6 priority areas that I've highlighted here, the key thing here is to enable payments. That's a key one, right? And of course, to coordinate actions. And lo and behold, last week, I think, Bank Negara and Bank of Thailand have actually announced that they're actually going to launch a cross-border QR payments linkages. So which means our Do It Now QR and the Thai QR will be interoperable. Okay, so which means those of us, when the borders do open, whenever we go to Thailand and vice versa, we should be able to use our QR codes in each of the respective countries. So this is actually a very positive development. And this is what I've been saying all this while. Like, cross-border will actually help to improve TPV, because now when you look at each country, is no longer dependent only on the domestic consumption, but also on the consumption from people who actually visit from outside of the country. Yeah. So the government's push for cashless is actually quite notable as far as Malaysia is concerned. Those of you who remember last year, it started off by the government introducing E29, where they actually put 50 ringgit into qualified people to encourage the use of e-wallets. Then COVID hit, and by June, July, they did another round under e-Penjana. Okay, and now the third one came in, where they actually, and this is the strongest one so far, where they actually pumped in 150 ringgit into eligible youth. All right, so you are talking about guys who can use anything from Shopee to Boost to Touch and Go to be able to use the 150 ringgit. Again, these are all things that the government is doing to encourage people to switch from cash to cashless. And this is actually bodes well for cashless payments company like GHL. Okay, now this is something that perhaps slipped through the net and perhaps not many people understand, but this is actually the Ministry of Health, where they actually came out with their cashless day. So beginning June 2021, whenever you go to a hospital or a clinic, government clinic, you're encouraged to use cashless means to settle your bills on Monday. So these are all initiatives which I find very encouraging, because the government is really encouraging people to go cashless. Okay, so that was a quick snapshot on the industry and where the government is pushing, and we are definitely in line with what the government wants to achieve. And they're actually giving a lot of incentives and spending a lot of money building up the environment or the ecosystem in order for cashless to thrive, right? So now today I'm going to now talk about GHL in particular. There are actually 3 key business pillars to GHL. The first and largest is what we call our TPA business. Our TPA business is a merchant acquiring business, where we acquire merchants to enable them to accept cashless means. Now, this will be anything from your physical debit credit cards down to QR payments, mobile payments, to doing online transactions, as well as digital services such as prepaid top-ups, bill collections, loan collections, and so on and so forth. You can even pay your PTPTN loan repayments at some of our selected merchant points. Okay. Now, shared services and solution services are more focused on the infrastructure part of the business, where we support banks as well as big merchants by supplying the acceptance terminals, as well as providing what we call secure payment network solutions. So this would include proprietary hardware and software for enabling secure payment networks to be deployed. Yeah. So broadly, these are the three key pillars that we run, and part of this is driven by the fact that increasingly commerce and government services are all becoming digital. Yeah. Okay, so when you look at GHL, when you see where we are providing all manners of acceptance. Okay, not just a physical, what I call a credit card terminal, which is the common term, but we are also doing retail POS, meaning our payment solutions are already integrated into merchants' retail POS. We have self-service kiosks to do transactions as well as online. So when we look at where we are today, we are already acceptance all manners of card payments, debit and credit, as well as probably the largest range of mobile QR payments. Okay, I believe we are probably the only company in Southeast Asia that has got this wide range of payment types. Yeah. So a quick snapshot about us. This is as of 2020 December, just to give you a sense of where we are, but I will give you more up-to-date numbers shortly. We are roughly just under 400,000 payment touch points. We process approximately 20 billion ringgit worth of goods and services last year. Our GP margins were stable at 43%, and we actually have got, we are in a net cash position, and our market cap is about 2 billion today. Yeah. All right. Just to run through a few key attributes about us. When you talk about payments, these are the key things most people will look at. First thing is to look at our robust TPV growth. I mentioned just now, last year we did approximately 20 billion. Okay. Today we are in the first quarter of 2021, we actually did 6 billion. So if we maintain this trajectory, we are looking at least, if you annualize it, you will get at least a 20%. But in the first quarter of 2021, we did about 45% year-on-year growth as far as TPV. TPV actually measures the amount of goods and transactions that we did. Now, if you look at this quick chart, you will see that in the second quarter of last year, at the peak of our MCO 1.0, our TPV actually dropped. Now, that was the trough. But since then, we have seen it actually improve. So actually, if you discount this, our trend is actually a very nice uptrend. Okay. So like I mentioned, first quarter, we did about 6 billion. Obviously, second quarter will be a bit of a question mark given our strict lockdown that has been imposed in May and June. But I'm pretty certain that our numbers are actually going to be higher TPV wise when you compare year on year to the second quarter of last year. I'll talk a bit more about this later. Second one I want to talk about is what we call our TPA merchant footprint. Yeah. So when you look at this, as of the first quarter of 2021, we have about 388,000 touch points in total, of which 154 are what I call TPA touch points. Now, TPA touch points essentially is touch points where we manage and we make income on a transaction basis, right? So overall, our footprint was down 2%, which includes bank terminals that we manage and maintain. But our TPA touch points was actually up 7%. So all our geographical markets were actually up, with the exception of flat Thailand because of the tourism and ePay as well. But actually, if you look at this, our touch point has been a fairly stable growth as far as payments and ePay business is concerned. Third one, contrary to what people think, our range of acceptance is actually very wide, which means we are actually not dependent on any one particular payment types. So from here, you can actually see we do both online and offline. We do debit, we do credit, we do domestic wallets, cross-border wallets, And of course, on the ePay side, as far as digital products are concerned, we do bill collections, we do telco top-ups. So a lot of these businesses, when you sort of like aggregate them together, has actually helped us to kind of maintain our margins, despite the TPV being challenging, being up and down Q on Q, all right, because of COVID lockdowns and so on and so forth. Yeah. The third one, and I will talk about this in a bit more detail, just to give you a sense, is our wide payment network. I will cover this later. And the key thing to note about our business is the fact that despite the uncertainties of movements of consumer lockdown and restrictions of movement and so on and so forth in Southeast Asia as well as in the world, you'll see that our recurring business is actually remains very, very stable. Okay, what I call the annuity part of our business. And you can see that over the last 2 years, we've been holding about 87, high 80s%, okay, which means it is transaction based and recurring revenue. So we don't really rely on hardware sales, okay? So when you look at us on a group basis, we've actually been holding our GP margins operationally at around 40 odd%. Okay, so in the first quarter, we did about 41%, right? So bear in mind that we are still in stages of lockdown in the various countries that we operate in. So I think this performance of 41% GP margins is actually very, very more than respectable. Okay, and lastly, this is where I think a lot of people are excited about cashless because of this huge 4 trillion consumer market, which the bulk of which today is still very much cash-based, all right? Okay, so quick one, just to share with those guys who are not familiar with us, we are primarily operating in Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines today. We are in Indonesia, but very small. We kind of like slowed down our investments into Indonesia last year because of COVID. But our payment terminals have been fairly stable, and like I mentioned, subject to a few retrievals by some banks in the countries that we operate. Generally, our TPA points has been actually on an uptrend. Okay, potential for this part of the business remains very, very strong because, as you can see from here, terminal penetration is still very, very low vis-a-vis the developed countries. Just now, early on, if you remember from the slide that I mentioned, we are only about at 23. The government actually wants to see us at 30 over terminals, closer to 32, 33 terminals. Yeah. So I just want to quickly touch on e-wallet performance, which is the theme at the moment where the government has been pushing. We are the widest acceptance of the various e-wallets in all the various countries. And in 2020, despite being a COVID year, we actually saw our TPV actually grow 1%, which I think is very respectable because our cross-border wallet from the Chinese tourists, Alipay, completely almost disappeared. Okay, so as you can see from here, we still showed Q on Q growth on e-wallet domestic as far as e-wallet TPV is concerned. Yeah. Now, obviously, we are slightly down year on year compared to first quarter of last year, simply because we actually had a very high cross-border TPV from Alipay before the lockdown. Okay, so I think most of you have seen all these static QRs around. The growth potential is actually very, very strong. And one of the reasons is there is almost an instant and easy sign up. So whenever the government actually went out with the e-Belia initiative recently, you saw that a lot of young people actually literally turn on their phones and to get the 150 ringgit. So this is part of that change in consumer behavior, I think, which is going to make it more sticky going forward, partly because of what the e-wallets themselves are doing, because they are always doing some form of cashbacks and discounts. Okay, for example, so if you actually look at this, right, you just open any of your e-wallets, you will see all sorts of discounts being given by all the major e-wallets. Now, these are just some of the new recent ones that we spotted. So you will see anybody from people like Petron to DIY to GrabPay to Mr. Shopee is actually giving cashbacks. And GHL actually is acquiring all of them. So we actually are benefiting by all this spending, or rather the incentives that's been given by the e-wallet players themselves, in addition to what the government is doing, right? So e-wallets are multifaceted. They are not just used for payments. So, and I think in terms of increasing functionality, you will see a lot more stickiness. and this is going to be one of the areas where e-wallets is actually a very good place to actually capture the underbanked or the underserved part of the group for people who are not even banked yet. Yeah. So in 2020, as I showed in the previous slide, consumers' willingness to switch to cashless was actually amazing because, like I mentioned, when we compare first quarter 2020 and first quarter 2021, the ratio between domestic e-wallets versus cross-border wallets was completely reversed. All right, so a huge willingness amongst local guys to actually accept this. Okay, quick one to talk about COVID and how the impact is. Just to give you guys a snapshot of where we are. And fortunately, Malaysia's numbers have is trending downwards. This is as of 21st of June, 2 days ago. Incidentally, our rate is quite close to Singapore's rate when they peaked, and in April of last year when they actually had high numbers. Yeah, these numbers, I think we all have to be very careful because of the variant. We are not quite sure whether or not inoculation by itself will be the answer, although it is one step in the right direction. So just to look at this very quickly, you will see that compared to some of the Western countries, which have very high percentage of population which is fully inoculated, and the key one that's been led by the US and the UK, where almost half of their population are already fully vaccinated. Yeah, we are probably closer to about 5% today, 5-6%. The numbers are a little bit old. This is from last week, but as we can see from here, this is a recent one. The UK numbers are starting to come up, and because of different strains of the variant. So despite having half of the population fully vaccinated, you see that their infections are actually growing. Now, the reason why I'm showing this is because it is very difficult for people to gauge when the lockdown will be relaxed and how and if we will see borders reopen, when we will be reopened. Now, this will have a direct impact on foot traffic for the offline side of the business. So just take all this in mind as we go forward in the next, and we look forward for the next few quarters. Okay, so quick one, when we look at TPA and what is the impact to the group, obviously on the offline side and on our ePay, it's very obvious when there's a strict lockdown and people can't go out, you will see a dip in the TPV. Obvious, right? But what we have seen is online payment actually has been on an uptrend. So when we look at this, this is my monthly trend. And you can see that when the lockdowns were introduced in May especially, our TPV was down, but it's actually not down badly. We are talking about perhaps 10% or low teens. But what is interesting about this chart is when you compare year on year for April and May, we are still up. Even on the offline side, we are still up. So we are actually capturing transactions which are higher at MCO3 vis-a-vis MCO1. Okay, so the trend is just a reflection of the amount of lockdown that the government is doing. But when we compare year on year, we are actually up. Okay, so on the shared services and solution side, we are seeing that because of COVID, some of the banks are doing some retrievals. So we are seeing less rental and maintenance revenue as a result of that, but our TPA footprint is actually growing. Yeah. So when you look at this, it's actually just to show where Malaysia is specifically. Our infection rates are coming down, and thank God our vaccinations are actually on an uptrend. Okay, so the government is increasing its efforts. So the sooner more and more vaccinations are done, hopefully the numbers will start to come down and things will start to get relaxed. So some positive news on that front. Okay, for those who didn't join us for our quarterly results, this is our snapshot of our first quarter numbers. We did decent numbers in the first quarter, but the key thing here is that our cash flow remains very, very strong. Okay, we have continued to generate very strong operational cash flows. This is for reference for those to our historical numbers. I won't go through this. Okay, this is a snapshot, and I think this is one of the reasons why GHL is very strong, because we have our footprint in Southeast Asia and the very, very wide range of payment acceptance. So today you can actually go to a merchant and you can see very static QR codes individually out their store. But eventually, as the business grows, you will need to be able to accept a wider range of payments. So whenever GHL deploys a terminal at a merchant, you instantly get debit, credit, and all the wallets. So from the merchant perspective, they actually do not have to worry whether the customer that walks in, they will be able to accept payments or not, because we are already offering the widest range. And the key thing to note here is that at the bottom here, we are actually very close partners with a lot of banks when it comes to acquiring. So we are not competitors to them. The banks don't see us as competitors. And we continue to grow our business with them. Yeah, I think I got one last slide. Okay, I think you guys have seen this. I won't go through this in a very quick, very briefly. In the Southeast Asian e-commerce report, it is estimated that the online e-commerce part will actually be around 300 billion. But actually, when you look at the total digital part of the business, almost 3/4 of the opportunities are actually in the offline space. But I just want to share with you one interesting snippet which came out when Bank Negara actually released their annual report recently. Yeah, you'll see here that the governor actually said while online sales were still growing very strongly last year, online retail sales are still fairly small at 10% of total retail sales. So what you are saying here is that it doesn't matter where the growth is going to be, because GHL is actually present both on the online side and the offline side. So we will be able to capture. So although people think the online sales are actually very, very big, but if we actually check the Department of Statistics by the government, online retail sales is only less than 10% of total retail sales. So that shows you what the big opportunity there is still as far as offline payments are still concerned. Okay, so thank you very much. I think I managed to keep it below half an hour.